What are the best songs from Psalm 8? I'm Daniel Mount, joined today by my guest co-host Levi Johnston, and we'll answer that question on today's episode of the Expository Songs podcast. We've each picked 8 songs we really like from this psalm, and we haven't compared notes, so we don't know if there's any overlap yet. But before we start counting down our top 8, I'd like to introduce today's guest. Levi, I've probably known you, been in touch off and on for 15 years or more, for quite a while. And we've had a lot of common interests. It's cool to have you on the podcast, but before we start going through our top 8, maybe you can just introduce yourself, share a little bit about your testimony, where you're from, and also your background in Christian music.
My name's Levi Johnston, and I live down in the southernmost tip of Ohio. I'm married to Rebecca for almost 16 years, and our son Samuel's 14 years old. And I grew up in a musical family. My dad was a pastor. He and my mom and my sister sang as a trio in the 70s. I have an 8-track that they recorded, so that's how long ago that was. And that was long before I was born. My sister's cool. 19 years older than me, and I came around, and then my brother came around 3 years after that. And my dad passed away when I was 8, and my mom didn't really sing much after that, so I didn't learn to sing until I was 15, and my mom had passed away when I was 14. A friend of mine from school, since 5th grade, he's been my best friend. Wow. He had his mom take me to their church where he played piano, and he would stand next to me, and he'd kind of guide me along singing bass, because I already had like this affinity for singing bass and listening to bass singers, and he kind of showed me how to follow along with that. Mm-hmm. And that's when I realized I could kind of, hear music pretty decently. So I grew from that. There was a singing news article that taught shape notes, so I learned how to read shape notes from that. And my friend Jeff and I and a couple other people in high school, we went to the band room and started practicing singing. So then I was 15, 16, we were singing at churches and that kind of stuff. And that's when I always liked music, but that's when my love of music really grew. And I always listened to classical music and gospel music. Yeah. And then we sang there. I got into college and got in the concert choir. Concert choir, the choral music, and that's when I learned the really interesting, the way that music moves around and the other things you can do. And sometime in the middle, just after college, I joined the gospel quartet. We were called the Prophets, and then we were called the Mountain State Quartet, and then we were called New Prophets. There's a bunch of different things with there, but we traveled a lot of Ohio, West Virginia, Kentucky, and I was a bass singer, but when I joined the group, they needed a baritone singer, and I had never sung baritone before then. And got on the bus. We went somewhere. I learned it on the bus and sang with them for a couple of years, and that's when I met you in person, other than on the blog. But we met. I think that was Mount Vernon, Ohio.
You were opening for the Dixie Melody Boys in Mount Vernon, Ohio.
Yes. Yeah. That was terrifying. So I've learned.
And then you've also been involved in church music some too, haven't you?
Yes. The church that Rebecca and I go to, Sunshine Free Will Baptist Church in Huntington, West Virginia. We started going there in 2009, and it wasn't too long that the choir director had me come and lead the choir a bit, and then eventually I became the main choir director, and I've been the main choir director for at least 10 years now, which is really hard. I'm not that great at it, but I love music, so and God's got me there for a reason, so I stick around.
In church music, it's often not about who has the most knowledge, but who's willing to put in the hours, who's willing to serve, and it's the willingness to serve is the key thing. Before we jump into our top 8 songs from Psalm 8, when I reached out to you to see if you might be up for coming on and doing an episode here, you mentioned you particularly love this psalm, and it's tied to your interest in apologetics. So I thought maybe we could take a minute or two before we get into the songs, and you could share about your love for this song and its connection to your interest in apologetics.
Yeah, for sure. So apologetics, if you don't know, anyone's watching or listening, it's in general, it's a reasoned defense for something. And in Christianity, we have Christian apologetics. It's a reasoned defense of our faith, and we use everything from evidence that we see. We have history. We have all kinds of things. Anything that we can use to build a case for the faith. And I've been into apologetics since I was about 15 or 16 when I first learned that there's other views of reality that aren't Christianity. And it's been 30 some years ago now, and I'm still highly into it. And so one of my favorite things, I was a biology major in college, and I've always loved science and everything like that. And when I was in college, instead of, in the presence of atheist professors in a secular environment, my understanding of God actually grew, and my amazement of what God does in His general revelation. And His general revelations, that's presented in Romans 1 when it talks about the invisible things of God are made manifest by His creation, basically. And Psalm 8 just goes right into that, and we're praising God for the things He does in nature, the things we see in space, and that's why this is one of my favorite psalms.
Neat. Well, if you don't mind, I'll have you kick off with your number 8 song. We'll count down 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So if you don't mind, you can kick us off with your number 8 song from Psalm 8.
All right, my number 8 was a fun one, and it has this kind of bluegrass feel, and that was "We're Created in the Image of God" by Buddy Davis, and he's known for Answers in Genesis VBS songs, and we use that at our church every VBS for the past few years. And his songs are really fun. It had a really good kick or earworm to it, so you just kind of hear it over and over again. And I know our kids would love this song if we did it for our VBS. And it kind of focuses on verse 5 about the created in the image of man. Man created in the image of God, and it had this bluegrass feel, and I really liked it.
Yes, Buddy actually lived. He passed away just a couple of weeks ago, but he lived really close to he lived really close to the town where I saw you in concert, Mount Vernon, Ohio. He was from Mount Vernon or Fredericktown, the town right next to it. I forget, but he was from that area, and people who know him often know him for the work he did with the Answers in Genesis.
Oh wow, yeah.
My number 8 song is just simply titled Psalm 8 from a group called The Corner Room. They seek to set scripture to music word for word, pulling from the ESV. And I think this one's one of their best. Often somebody who tries to set every word of a psalm to music word for word will lose something in structure or flow. And they were able to make this one flow really well, I think. How would you have at number 7?
Okay, my number 7 was Awesome God. It was performed by Emu Music and written by Ashley Reeder and Nikki Chiswell.
Okay.
And it was a good praise song. I was thinking of songs that our church could do. Our church does mostly redback hymnal type songs, and anything written between 1985 and 1997. That's about it. And but this one had just maybe slowing down the tempo a little bit. This had a really good flow, I think, and it matched up really good with Psalm 8. I think it was a good contender for this one.
Cool. And yeah, I think it's good to have guests on who lean towards something that would work in their church. Like, I didn't have that one in my top 8 just because I don't think it would quite fit my context as well, but that's why it's great to have multiple perspectives and not just mine. At number 7, I have one that it's kind of iffy. It might work in my context. I'm not quite sure it's congregational enough, though. And that's Psalm 8, How Majestic Is, written by Matt Boswell and Matt Papa, and recorded by Matt Papa. They've written a number of songs that are well on their way to becoming standards in a lot of churches, probably best known for Come Behold the Wondrous Mystery. And they have a number of others that are sung in churches that sing a lot of modern hymns. This one isn't one of their top 10, top 20 best known, but it is a solid setting with a nice melody, and the lyric does go through a lot of the themes of the psalm well.
Yeah.
What do you have at number 6?
Number 6 was a Henry Francis Light was the composer, the author, and it's "O Lord, how good, how great art thou." And it was a simple melody in common meter, and based on what I saw on hymnary, it was incorporated with a lot of different melodies. So one of the ones I picked out and I kind of plunked around to see how it sounded. Because it was that simple melody, is like an 8/6/8/6 meter. That would have been easy to incorporate in the church service, and it was one of those that it focused on verse 1, and verse 1 is one of my favorite parts of this psalm anyway. I just love anything that praise of God, and this one is so traditional, it was 1800s, and I really like that one as well. I think it could be used in a lot of churches, whether with any melody. I think you could teach it to any congregation.
Yeah, and so actually that was one of my picks as well. I had 2 picks in the retuning challenge, and this was one of them. Not that I think any of the melodies were bad, it's just it didn't seem to have one melody that people really associate with it. And so this is one of those that I think composers out there could maybe take another look at. Like, I think all the melodies that are out there are good, but I think this lyric really stood out. O Lord, how good, how great art thou, in heaven and earth the same. Their angels at thy footstool bow, here babes thy grace proclaim. When glorious in the nightly sky thy moon and stars I see, oh, what is man, a wondering cry, to be so loved by thee. Those are really good lyrics. That lyric really jumped out to me too. And I really mainly had it in the retuning challenge because there wasn't any one melody that grabbed me, like, this is the melody.
Right. Yeah. But yeah, those words, it's almost, I don't know, it just catches it really well. I love that one.
It does. I think it's one of the best lyrics from Psalm 8. I really liked it too. So at number 6, I have How Excellent by Jamie Souls. He was actually the first artist guest I had on this podcast. His songs have come up time and again as we go through this psalm series.
Mm-hmm.
And I think of the song of the first, he has settings of each of the first 8 psalms. I think this is my favorite of any of his first 8 psalms. And looking ahead to future ones, probably one of my favorite of his psalm settings overall.
All night.
What do you have at number 5?
My number 5 was written by, I think, another of your guests, Mark Altrogi. I'm giving that a shot on that name.
He did come
and that song was How Majestic.
That's how he said it. I'm not 100% sure. Yes.
Yeah. And this was performed by Sovereign Grace Music. And I only recently discovered Sovereign Grace Music. My brother-in-law up in around the Cleveland area goes to a church, and they do a lot of Sovereign Grace Music, and we went and visited. And it's like, oh, okay. I'd heard the name, but I hadn't really heard it before. And so this one had another earworm. The chorus on it was just really catchy. I found myself kind of humming it every once in a while. And then verse 1 focuses on verses 3 and 4 of the psalm, and it bridges it with Christ's sacrifice. And I love anytime you can connect the Old Testament to the New Testament. That's just one of my favorite things, because the Bible is an entire story, and it's all interconnected. And anytime you can put that in a song and it'll hit people, I just love that. And that's one of my favorite things. And it was a song about God's majesty. That's another of my favorite topics. And so I just really appreciated the focus on this one for that.
Yes, so I've actually known about Sovereign Grace probably a little longer than the average because my mom had one of her closest friends as I was growing up. They were either close friends in high school or college roommates or both. I forget. But like a longtime friend from her high school or college days was a member of, and might even still be a member of, Sovereign Grace Church in the Cleveland area. And so back at the time, they were People of Destiny, and then they were PDI International, and then maybe about 98 or 2000, they renamed Sovereign Grace. But I do remember we visited all the way back when it was, at least when it was a PDI church, maybe even People of Destiny, going back a good ways. But I've known about them probably longer than the average person has, simply because one of my mom's closest friends from her youth was a member of one of their churches. And so we visited there a few times as I was growing up.
Oh, cool. Neat.
So at number 5, I have a song called Majestic, or Psalm 8, by Aaron Schust. It has a really solid melody and lyric. It's kind of in that CCM praise and worship vein. He has some messianic Jewish influences too, so those shine through a little bit in his songs. The most interesting thing about this song, I think, is where the bridge says, "You made him a little lower than Elohim." And Elohim is actually indeed what the Hebrew original says. It's usually translated, the word Elohim is usually translated God. But a Jewish tradition supported also by the Septuagint holds that this should be translated angels here. And most English translations follow that. And it was just really interesting to me, separate from the song itself. The song is a great song, but it was just interesting to me that Schust seemed to be like aware of this translation question and just kind of sidestepped it by simply using the Hebrew original word here. That was just a really interesting approach that stuck out to me.
Yeah. And I had that one.
So what do you have at number 4? Oh, sorry, if you have another thought on this one, go for it. You had it as a runner-up.
I had one. That one as one of my runner-up.
I didn't. Neat. Yeah, it really. I don't think I knew it as well as some of the ones I had on my mind prior to coming in. But the more I listened to it, the more I was like, this one's really solid. So, what do you have at number 4?
Number 4, I had Lord, Our Lord, Thy Glorious Name, Psalter 15. And that was by Fitting Praises, performed by Protestant Reformed Psalm Singing Choir. It's a mouthful of a name.
Yeah.
But it that tied right into my choral training when I was in college. It sounded exactly like a lot of the songs we did there. It had all those interesting melodies and the way the rhythms and that kind of thing. And it almost felt like, and this is another thing I've only recently discovered, was the Scottish Psalter, where it's turns the Psalms into a more metrical and poetic version of English, or there's some, and I guess Scottish. And this kind of felt like that. It felt like they were, manipulating the song, the lyrics back into a way that it made more poetic sense to English-speaking people, and I like that, and I think it did it really well with that. And then the choral sound, of course, was...
Yeah, I think Fitting Praises, I'm not sure if they're part of this movement, but I think they're at least adjacent or near on the spectrum. There are, to this day, a group of mostly Presbyterians, I think, who believe in only singing those psalm settings, where most other Christians would say we should sing psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs based on Colossians 3:16. They have an interesting understanding of that verse, that they understand it as to say psalms, which are hymns and spiritual songs, so we're only singing those psalm paraphrases. And I think that setting, whether or not the people who themselves put it together are exclusive psalmody, which is the term for it, I think they're like at least near there on the spectrum, and like I'm not there theologically. I really think we should sing psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs, and those are different categories of songs. Now, we should sing the psalms. Churches should sing psalms based on the songs based on the psalms, and that's like commanded in Scripture. But I don't think we should only sing psalms. That said, the people who only do it have put so much time and thought through the years into how we can do it well that they have a lot of really good settings that the rest of us can appreciate and pull from and learn.
Yeah.
So that was your number 4, right?
Yes.
Okay, I lost track just a little bit. So at number 4, I have O Lord Our Lord, Psalm 8 by Pete Crockett. He is a Scottish songwriter and artist who has collaborated with New Scottish Hymns. This song is very Scottish, very Celtic, and it's very delightful. It's in a minor key, but energetic, like Celtic music tends to be. And it also brings just a really different musical feel than all the other picks I have in my top 8. And the lyrics do a great job. They cover the main ideas of the entire psalm. So I thought that was a really solid top 5 pick for me. What song do you have at number 3?
Psalm number 3. Okay, I've got Psalm 8, Psalm 8, O Lord, our God, how wonderful, performed by songs in his presence. And this is another choral setting. I'd probably listen to this one the most out of all the ones in my list of all of them. And it just brought that back, that concert choir feel again. And this one was another one where it poetically built the psalm back together in a poetic way that works in English. And also, this is one I think our church could do. It was in E. The range was not too wide at all. The rhythms weren't overly complicated, and it is probably, I think, out of most of these, it was close to word for word with that, the arrangement for the poetic license and everything. But this is one of my favorite ones I listen to.
I actually hadn't known about your background in choral music, and it's really cool to have somebody with that background picking psalms. I think of all the guests I've had on for one of these episodes, you're the first person with a choral background. It's really cool to have that perspective on these songs.
Oh yeah, it's one of my favorite things. We toured a little bit in different churches and all kinds of different places. I ended up being the ended up being one of the bass section leaders. And we also had a smaller group called University Singers, and there were, I think, maybe 30 in the larger group, but then the University Singers there was about 8. And so we did even more complicated stuff. That I loved learning all that. It was really hard because rhythm is not my strong suit, and the rhythms in that were really weird. You'd change from one meter to another, and at time signatures they jump all around. So that really forced me to dig in and learn things, because I was just a biology major. So all these other people were music majors, and here I was like, I guess I'll learn it.
Yeah, it's really cool. So my number 3 kind of goes a different direction again musically, and that's Consider the Stars, written by Keith Getty, Kristen Getty, and Fiona Dabara, and recorded by Keith and Kristen Getty. In a sense, this song would seem to be out of place in a top 5 or top 8 compared to my other picks, and really all of our picks, because most of the rest cover the whole psalm or at least one of its main ideas. This one, on the other hand, really only covers one phrase. It's partway through verse 3. But it's all one sentence, the verses 3 and 4. When I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have ordained, what is man that you are mindful of him, and the son of man that you visit him? So it's really pulling from the opening and closing words of verse 3, when I consider the stars which you have ordained. This song is ultimately a song that encourages us not to fear, because the same God who put more stars than we can count in the sky holds us in his hand. And then the last verse encourages us to consider the stars and the star in the sky above the child king that pointed the wise men to Jesus. And Keith and Kristen Getty are known for their congregational songs. This is not a congregational song. it's more complex than almost any congregation would take on as a now perhaps as a choir or solo or special music, definitely, but there's an eighth note was called a melisma, I believe, and that's a whole group of notes sung on one syllable. Consider the stars in the sky, 8 different notes on that sky. A congregational song can get away with 2, maybe 3 on occasion. I don't know if I've ever heard a congregation that can do 8. But despite all of this, there is tremendous value. There's tremendous value to songs we sing on Sunday set from a psalm. We need those. But there are always more good songs than a church can get to in the course of a year, and there is tremendous value to listening to songs the rest of the week that prompt us to reflect on the truths of the passage. And that's more where I would categorize this one. And so I did. I liked it enough to put it in my top 5.
Yeah, I can see that one.
What do you have at number 2?
Number 2, I went way back for number 2. Let the Whole Creation Cry, and that was written by Stopford A. Brooke in 1881 from a Salzburg melody, and it was in 777 double meter, or 777 double meter. But the melody in it was so good and really, it was joyful, very upbeat, and the way the words connected in that, it was just arranged so well. And this one, I could see a congregation doing very easily. It's got some fun little movements and everything in that on that side. But I found an a cappella track by a group called Haven, and they had this kind of Larry Goss or Glad or a cappella version of it, and it just sounded like that sound. And if you had, I think, more of an advanced choir, you could do it that way as well. And they added a hallelujah in every other phrase or so. But it came out of the first 2 verses of Psalm 8, and it focused so well on the praise of God, which again, that's one of my favorite parts of that psalm. And I love any song that just points your attention Godward, and this one did that, and it just sounded so modern somehow, even though it was 1881, and then it just fit the words in there so well, and it covered, I think, the entire psalm, if I remember correctly, all the way through. And I like it when you could do that.
I need to go give that one another listen. I'm not. If I came across the recording of that, I must have missed the recording somehow. So I definitely need to give that one another listen.
Yeah.
At number 2, I have a song that will probably be the most familiar song on this list to many of the people who are listening, especially for those people who are 35 and up. Many of us grew up singing it in church, except for those in hymns-only churches. And that would be the praise song, How Majestic Is Your Name, written by Michael W. Smith and performed by Sandy Patty. This doesn't really go beyond the first verse of the psalm, and it's simple. It has the simplicity of an 80s, 90s praise song, but it has a really great, memorable melody, and the memorable part is why I ranked it this high. Just so many people know and remember this song. If I put it in my, I don't think my church has sung it ever, but if I put it in the set list this Sunday, we have a largely older congregation. Many of them have been in church their whole lives. We'd probably have 2/3 to 3/4 of the congregation singing it immediately, even though I don't think in this particular church we've ever done it before. Just a lot of people know it and remember it. It's an easy point of entry for many people in singing something from this psalm. And as a practical matter, especially for churches that are new to the idea of intentionally including psalms as some of the songs they sing in their worship services, it can help to have some of the, which is a conversation happening at my church right now, it can help to have some of the initial batch be familiar settings that people already know.
Mm-hmm. Right, yeah.
So what do you have as your top pick?
All right, I'm going out of the box on this one. Somehow, this song is not on the site anywhere for any verse or any scripture. And this is my favorite song of all time, and I've always tied it to Psalm 8. And that song is, I don't know if you can read that, How Great Thou Art. How Great Thou Art ties into a couple of the verses of Psalm 8. And I just can't. It's my favorite song. I can't not include it. I sing it at church probably. Yeah. Somebody asks me to sing it all the time. And the reason How Great Thou Art is my favorite song is it hits right in that sweet spot of apologetics and general revelation and worshiping God for His creative acts and who He is in that. And it just always puts me in the mood of awe at thinking about God, and even it makes me feel like when I go outside and look at the stars, because I love looking at the stars and trying to figure out where the constellations are, and there's that mind-blowing awe you have. Everybody feels it. Everybody knows it. It's just getting them to realize the reason you feel that is because God made this. He's pulling you to Him, and that's why I this one here in this Psalm 8. That's my favorite.
No, I think you're right. I need to, that makes enough sense connected. I can see just as you talk about it, the first couple verses of the Psalm, first 4 verses. I do need to get that on. I'll plan to add that. That's a good call. I need to add it for this Psalm, add it to the list. So thank you. And at my number 1, I have a song that I didn't really know. I'd listened to once to categorize it for this site, but I didn't really know prior to going through the songs for this episode. And that's a song called Beyond the Stars, Psalm 8, written by Nathan Alberson and Philip Moyer, recorded by My Soul Among Lions. And I put this on at number 1 because of all the songs on this list, it's the one I think I'm most inclined to want to try to introduce in my church. It's very congregational, without dragging or being boring or anything like that. And it covers a lot of the ideas in the psalm while still sounding fresh and current. One of the ways it does this is doing something kind of unique lyrically. Instead of rhyming lines 2 and 4 of a verse, or 1 and 3, 2 and 4, it rhymes lines 2 and 3. Which is an unusual choice. I found it mildly confusing on the first listen or two, but came to appreciate it. And I like, a lot of the psalm paraphrases that cover every idea of a psalm were written in the 17 or 1800s and lyrically sound like they were written in the 17 or 1800s, which is not bad. My church sings more traditional hymns than anything else, and we can do those. But I always have some appreciation lyrically when somebody's going through the whole psalm, covering all the ideas of the psalm in current English. I think there's a place for those songs too, and I always appreciate when somebody's doing that for our generation. And so I'll give 2 verses, two verses of the song that I think illustrate its approach really well. It says, "You have ordained the mouths of babes, that songs of joy may ever flow, that you may silence every foe through mouths of babes. And how the little children laugh, think how wonderful and odd, that you should crown as sons of God, the sons of man." So I really like that approach.
Mm-hmm.
We can move on to runners-up. I think you mentioned you had at least one runner-up.
Yeah. Where is it? Yeah. This was a runner-up. It wasn't very strong poetically. It seemed like it was written by just a singer-songwriter. It was a lady named Scylla Elam. It was called Who Am I? And it was another one that just bridged Old Testament and New Testament together. I think she had all of 18 listens on YouTube. So it was decent. I liked it.
Yes. Yeah, I remember that one too. I had a number of well-known names from Christian music in my runners-up. How Majestic Is Thy Name by Keith Green, and How Excellent Is Thy Name, recorded by Larnell Harris, written by Dick and Melody Tunney and Paul Smith. Those are both really good songs. And I like both songs, and I entered this assuming I would have both in my top 5, or top 8. But as it turned out, there were just so many really good songs from this psalm that I got to the point of thinking, okay, I have to set aside the songs I already know. I can't bias myself too much towards something because I already know it, because I already like and appreciate Keith Green's music and Lionel Harris's music. because the other ones I have in the top 8 are just that good of song, I think. There were some others. Alex Trigstad, I really like his take on How Majestic Is Your Name, Psalm 8. There's a group called the Shire Poets, which I believe has the praise and worship songwriter Brian Dorkson in the group. They had a song, Majestic, Psalm 8. And Kingdom Kids and Shane did a Psalm 8, How Majestic Is Your Name. Finally, What Is Man by Amy Shreve. Again, another artist that's, I don't believe that well known, that didn't have many views on YouTube, but I thought it was a really good song. There are just a lot of good songs from this song.
Yeah. There were a lot that did that first line of the psalm, How Majestic Is Your Name, and a lot of them were very catchy. A lot of them had that praise and worship feel. It would be a good song to open the service with, and there were just so many to pick from that for a time it was a little overwhelming, and I had to cut it down in portions to see which ones I really liked.
Yes. And I think something we both did in picking here, which I appreciate that we both did this, is it would be really easy to get a top 5 or top 8 that just pulls from the first verse or two, because there are so many catchy, strong, good songs from the first verse or two that have that catchiness. As soon as you hear it, you can see why people like it. Like, I get why people like Sandy Patty's How Majestic Is Your Name. And there are so many other songs like that. And I really appreciate that both of our lists pull good songs that either cover the whole psalm or other verses too.
Yeah.
So the last segment, other than the closing, is the retuning challenge. And these are songs where the lyric really stuck out to us as we were going through. And either it doesn't have a melody, or there wasn't one melody that's so strongly associated with it that is the melody of the song. So I believe you mentioned you had at least one song there where the melody really jumped out to you.
Yeah, this one was When Heaven, Thy Beauteous Work on High by Nahum Tate and Nicholas Brady, and this was from 1696.
Oh, yeah.
And there were, on hymnary, there were only 2, and it was only the lyrics. There was no melody, no tune attached to it. And the 4th verse, I loved the 4th verse. It was, O thou to whom all creatures bow, within this earthly frame, through all the world, how great art thou, how glorious is thy name. And I just, hit that sweet spot again for me. But I couldn't find any sheet music, no tune, so it's a retuning challenge on account of there's no tune.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier, we were talking a little bit about the old, largely, not exclusively, but a lot of it comes from the Scottish Presbyterian tradition of only singing psalms and the psalm paraphrases. For, I think, 50 years or more, Tate and Brady's paraphrases were like the paraphrases everybody sang. They were like the standard paraphrases of the psalms for a good generation or 2 generations after they wrote it. The other song, incidentally, Nahum Tate's best known for, other than the psalm paraphrases, is the Christmas carol, While Shepherds Watch Their Flocks by Night. Little trivia there.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah. Cool.
And so I had 2 songs in the retuning challenge, but I already talked about one of them, Oh Lord, how good, how great art thou, because you had it in your top 8. And that was from Henry Francis Lyte, who we best know for Abide With Me. The other one I really liked, for the same reason that you mentioned liking a number of the other psalm settings, was Isaac Watts's take on Psalm 8, O Lord, our Lord, how wondrous great. And it has that same component you mentioned on a couple of songs of how it directly ties in Jesus and Jesus' fulfillment of this psalm. And I think I'll just, because it's not that long, I'll just go through all the verses of this, all the verses of this one. O Lord, our Lord, how wondrous great is thine exalted name. The glories of thy heavenly state let men and babes proclaim. When I behold thy works on high, the moon that rules the night, and stars that well adorn the sky, those moving worlds of light. Lord, what is man or all his race who dwells so far below, that thou shouldst visit him with grace and love his nature so, that thine eternal Son should bear to take a mortal form, made lower than his angels are to save a dying worm. Let him be crowned with majesty who bowed his head in death, and be his honor sounded high by all things that have breath. Jesus, our Lord, how wondrous great is thine exalted name. The glories of thy heavenly state let the whole earth proclaim. Of all the songs that tied in the Psalm's fulfillment of Jesus, this one just gives me goosebumps every time I read it.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's a good one.
So thank you so much. I think we're wrapping up. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I know that this psalm was a challenge in a way because there's more songs from this one than almost any other psalm. I mean, maybe not more than Psalm 23. But this is probably in the top 5 or 10 of psalms that have the most settings of it. It was a lot of songs to go through, a lot of time for you. Thank you so much for putting in the time to do this. I really appreciate it.
It was a pleasure to go through that, and I really appreciate you letting me talk about it a little bit. And the expository song site is just awesome. So I always encourage people to make sure you check that out, because there's just so much you can get out of that. And I think if more churches start dipping into this, I think it'll be good for congregations everywhere. It's so powerful and so useful.
That's definitely the goal. So in conclusion, if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend, subscribe to catch future episodes. You can also find past episodes and the free 74,000 entry Expository Songs searchable database at expositorysongs.com. Thank you for listening.